The Transparency Project started actually not with such great aims. I mean, we've ended up in a place where we are really having an impact on the equitable opportunities for all students to succeed in college, not just the well-prepared students, but the students we actually have. We started off, however, just trying to help faculty answer a simple question, which was this: if I had time to change one thing about my teaching, one thing that would benefit the population of students I actually have in my class, what would that one thing be? And back in about 2008, we asked this question when I was at the University of Chicago and also working at University of Illinois with faculty there. And faculty began to say, well, we don't have the information we need, we don't have the data we need to make that decision about the one thing we should change. And I said, what would you like to know? What would help you decide? And that was where this study was born, where the questions on the survey we use came from. We did well in achieving the goal of informing faculty about there's many aspects of their students' learning experience and how that would inform their choices to change something about their teaching. Because of the grassroots interest across the country in this project, we ended up gathering more data than we ever expected. So we've got data from tens of thousands of students on 44 different aspects of their learning experiences and 15 demographic questions about who they are. We're beginning to see patterns in that larger data that enabled us to come up with the kinds of findings that I'll be sharing with you today. While you see my face as the representative of this project, as its founder and director, I wanted to just credit the people on our research team that are behind the scenes making the analyses happen. Here's how I'd like for us to spend our time today. And it'll become clear to you very soon why I'm using this format of purpose, task, and criteria to describe what we're going to do together. Our overall goal for today is for you to understand our findings about how transparent assignment design can more equitably boost the success of all students. I also want for us to consider how you might apply these findings in your own contexts. The tasks, or the way we'll go about this, is first I'm going to give you a pretty quick research overview, and then you'll start working to apply the findings to your own contexts. What I hope you'll leave with is not just an understanding of the research, but some real draft ideas of what you could do, like the draft beginnings of an assignment, or some adjustments to an existing assignment that you could use in your courses to help all students succeed. So the kind of context in which we are finding success with this TILT project now. Here's the kind of context we're in terms of higher ed across the country. More and more students than ever before have access to higher education, whether at the community college or four-year or beyond. But they're not having an equity of experience in the same way that access is wide open. The experience is not the same for all these students. We know, for example, that underrepresented students in terms of their ethnicities, first-generation students and low-income students, bottom quintile of family income, they're about half as likely to graduate college in 4 years as their white and Asian counterparts. Half as likely. And we know that this is the incoming new majority population of students in this country in college. We still have a kind of traditional gatekeeper mentality that says if the students come in underprepared, we should weed them out. That's a mistake not only because it means we're trying to weed out the majority of new incoming students, which is crazy, but it also, it's sort of unfair and wrong from that perspective. It also is detrimental to the upper levels of research. Most research breakthroughs come from thinkers who are thinking from outside the discipline or in a different way from the traditional thinkers who have mastered the discipline. Malcolm Gladwell talks about outlier thinkers. If we weed out all the outlier thinkers, then we end up producing at the top of the pyramid people who think exactly like the people who are trying to break through these research problems that we have. So we are narrowing our capacity for research breakthroughs by having a gatekeeper type of teaching. We also know that high-achieving high school students, just to succeed in high school, does not guarantee college success anymore, because the kind of thinking you need to do in high school is not the same as the sort of critical thinking skills that we use for success in college. And even those high school students who come in really well prepared with good critical thinking skills, they're coming in as novice students to a discipline, which means they're unfamiliar with how to use those critical thinking skills that they may have mastered in high school in another discipline. They just don't know how to use those skills in another discipline yet. So these are many of the reasons why across higher ed we have this problem between the equity of access and the equity of experience. When I asked you questions about the students that you're working with now in your classes, we see something that reflects back to us our own version at UNLV of that exact sort of nationwide context that I was describing to you. I asked you about the biggest challenges your students face in completing their assignments successfully, and some strategies you have for helping students complete their academic work successfully here at UNLV. And here's what you said. One of the biggest challenges is a lack of preparation. Another challenge is motivation. Motivation often stems from that lack of preparation. Right? Not being prepared and realizing it is something that can really hurt your motivation. And then time management was another really big challenge that we all face. Now, while you didn't all have a strategy that maps on exactly to your own challenge, that solves your challenge, when you put everyone's challenges and strategies together, you see a kind of chart here, which you'll find on the final page of your handout, that shows us some actual strategies we have for solving our own challenges here. So you've got some great ideas about how to have students begin working on assignments in class. Practice the skills they need to succeed in class, under your watch, where you can provide real-time, immediate help when they're floundering. You've also got ideas about time management to help them with that, to sort of provide, to take an assignment and break it down into smaller parts where they get feedback at each step of the way, to reinforce what it is they know they're doing well. So that copy of that chart is for you at the end of your handout. And we'll go through some of these examples in more detail. What does it look like when you do these things in practice? I want to just clarify what we meant by transparency when we started. It's the term that now we're using as the name of the project, and it connotes all kinds of issues now that are political that we didn't quite imagine we'd be up against when we started this many years ago. But all we meant by transparency was that we want for teachers and students to talk explicitly as part of the course time, as part of their class meeting time together. We want for them to talk about not just the what or the content of the course, but also the how and the why. How are you structuring their learning experiences, and why have you caused them to learn these things in this particular way? That should be part of the content of the course now. That should be part of the conversation. How does transparency help students? We've seen in our research that the benefits are good for all students, and especially large for students who are unfamiliar with college success strategies. That kind of college knowledge that the more privileged students have coming in, but that the majority of students coming into college no longer have, or not all of them. They're not guaranteed to have that kind of unwritten college knowledge. Here's what we did last year with a group of faculty across the country, in partnership with the Association of American Colleges and Universities. And the one-page research summary of what I'm about to tell you is on page 10 of your handout. We worked with 7 minority-serving institutions ranging from small size to large, community college up through high research level university, geographically dispersed, so that by the time we were done, any institution in this country could look at our group and find an institution that in some way was like them. We aimed at minority-serving institutions because we wanted to be able to disaggregate different groups of students and still end up with sample sizes large enough to matter to the federal government that has a cutoff of something, I think, around 350, sample sizes that matter to future funders. You can see our breakdown of students, that we had quite a number of first-generation students and underrepresented students, low-income students, and we also had a whole lot of multiracial students, which is probably a new direction for higher ed across the country. Because at minority-serving institutions, students are no longer saying, I am just this one ethnicity. They are multiple ethnicities, and so we found that to be a really substantially sized group in our study. We asked the teachers to do this. Take 2 assignments out of your course and revise them to make them more transparent or more accessible to students. I'll show you what they did in a moment. But we did this with 2 assignments in a course, and teachers were doing 2 sections of the same course simultaneously. So in one section of the course, they taught the assignments the same way they always had, and in the other section, they took out 2 assignments and revised them in this way that you'll be doing. The results we had were really dramatic and astonishing for us. We didn't expect for it to really turn out quite as well as it did. We ended up boosting students' learning in 3 significant ways. First, their academic confidence increased. Second, their sense of belonging in college increased. And third, they recognized that they were improving skills that employers on national surveys tell us they care about the most when they're hiring. These first 2 measures, the increased academic confidence and increased sense of belonging, other researchers have already tied those outcomes directly to higher grades, higher long-term GPAs, and higher retention rates, which means we've now accidentally discovered a pretty simple teaching intervention where if you do it twice, you help the well-prepared students significantly, and the underprepared students a whole lot more, significantly and even more, right? So you'll see that our results were good for all students, but especially good for the underserved students, which means we've accidentally discovered this kind of framework for a social justice way of teaching that gives all students a more equitable shot at success. Here's what that looks like in graph form, and the 1-page research summary on page 10 of your handout has this exact graph. What I want to point to here is the effect size numbers. So in education research, we feel great if we can find an effect size of 0.25. That's a small effect that means something. We ended up with the whole group, all disciplines, across all disciplines, all students in our study. We had sort of smallish to medium effect size differences for these students on the measures of academic confidence and their sense of belonging. We wanted to be sure that this wasn't predisposed, that we weren't just looking at students in the test group that were somehow more equipped to do better at the end. So we started off with a baseline equivalence test where we asked students about their confidence levels and their skill sets at the beginning of term, and we saw really no significant differences between the 2 groups. And then at the end of the term, when we looked at the differences, disaggregating for the underserved students, lower income levels and underrepresented ethnicities and first-generation students, we saw even larger differences, even larger benefits for those students. And I show you the first-generation sample here where we've got effect sizes hovering in the medium to large effect size range. Here's all we ask the teachers to do. Take 2 assignments out of your course, and for those 2 assignments, talk with the students before they do any work. Talk with them about 3 things: the purpose, the task, and the criteria for that assignment. We want for students to know up front the purpose. There's 2 parts to the purpose: the skills the students will practice by doing this assignment and the knowledge they will gain. You have a copy of this whole template on page 6 of your handout. Then we wanted for them to discuss the task, or I should back up and say with the skills and the knowledge, we wanted for teachers to talk with students about that, not just in terms of how these skills and knowledge will help you in this one assignment, but how the skills and knowledge from this one assignment would be useful to you and important to you in other contexts as well. The task of the assignment: what am I supposed to do and how do I do it? This does not mean doing the work for students. Instead, it means focusing them on the steps you want them to follow so that their time is well spent on producing better quality work. You eliminate the chances for them to run down tangents and other paths or to do things that were extraneous to what you intended, and they focus all their time doing the kind of quality work you wanted. Then criteria for success. We wanted for the faculty to give students a checklist, some sort of set of criteria in advance, so the students could judge how they were doing while they were doing the work. But that wasn't enough, because a checklist for a student who's not prepared to be in college, who's never seen college work before, a checklist isn't enough. We wanted the students also to have annotated examples of good work. Not just one example, because what happens when you give students one example? They copy it, or they'll stick really closely to it because that's safe. If you show them multiple ways of satisfying the requirements or the criteria, then they'll see there are multiple ways of doing good work. And it's not just enough to give them those multiple samples of work. We wanted the teachers to discuss with the students so that they could annotate those examples. Here's how this work is good, and here's how that other example is good. It's different, but it still meets this criterion, right? This doesn't mean you have to annotate all the examples, because you don't have examples of annotated work ready to go for your students. But the exercise of having the students annotate sample work with you in class actually was very beneficial for the students as well. This idea of transparency is not something that we just invented. It's actually grounded in prior research. And I want to run you through some of that prior research a little quickly so that we'll save time for you to apply that research to your own assignments. You'll notice on the first page of your handout, there's a chart. And on the left-hand side of the chart, you see the last names of authors who have conducted research studies. The full citations for all of the studies are on the flip side of the first page. On the right-hand side of the chart, or in your case, it's the middle of the chart, you see what is the takeaway implication of what I do about this research discovery. What do I now do about this in my teaching? Sometimes it's hard to make that link between the research studies and what I do about it, because unless your field is college learning and teaching, you might not have all the time in the world to read the studies and then decide what you're going to do about them, right? So this chart tries to save you time in that regard, and it also gives you empty boxes on the right-hand side to jot down right now what you might do about it. Remember I told you that we want to give students multiple annotated examples of what good work looks like? I want to do that for you now as well as we walk through these research takeaway ideas. So if you look at your chart, you'll see numbers 1, 2, all the way through 6. Those correspond to the headings and the page numbers on your handout. So takeaway research point number 1 on page 1 with heading 1 in your handout is this. All of these authors have produced lots of studies of work for which a big important takeaway point is this. There are two, actually. First, if you want for students to do something that is unfamiliar, to take a risk, maybe to do a creative project, or just to do a kind of thinking that they've not done before, if you have them do that the first time in a low-stakes environment where it doesn't count for a giant chunk of their grade, they'll be more willing to experiment, to be more creative. Once it counts for a large chunk of their grade, they'll follow the examples more closely. There will be less innovation. The second important idea from this body of research is that varied and flexible formats for assignments have the chance to appeal more equitably to different styles of learners. What you see on page 1, heading 1 here on your handout is 3 ways of giving the exact same assignment. The assignment is, tell me the ideas you have for your paper so I can give you feedback that will help you write your paper. But you see that we have 3 different ways of doing that. In the first example, on the left, we've got a teacher asking for an ABC 1, 2, 3 outline. In the second example, it's a diagram that shows how ideas overlap each other and how some contain other ideas. And in the third example at the bottom, you see just some broad general questions. What main sources will you use? What big counter argument are you worried about? Those kinds of questions. But all 3 ways of giving this assignment will help different styles of thinkers get the feedback they need to work on their paper. Now, I don't mean you have to give every assignment 3 ways. All I mean is over the course of a whole term with students, think about a variety of assignments that would appeal to different styles of learners. Takeaway point number 2 is that we want to build up students' skills in a sequence, from simplest skill to most complicated, most compound skill. On page 2 of your handout, you see 2 examples of how different instructors have done that. So page 2, heading 2. The first one is Bloom's taxonomy of educational objectives. You've probably seen this a lot of times. What I like about this version is the right-hand column has trigger words you can use to cause students to do the kind of thinking in the corresponding box on the chart. So it's a quick way to help you design an assignment that will target a particular skill set. On the bottom of the chart, on the bottom of page 2, you see how a team-taught business course showed students which homework assignments were helping them to build up which skill sets. The teachers for this introductory level business course looked at their accrediting body, the Association of American Colleges and Schools of Business, which gives them something like 10 or 12 learning outcomes that they care most about. They put those learning outcomes at the top of their chart, and they showed students which homework assignment helps them practice which skill set. You notice that they work on very few and simple skills at the beginning of the term, and the assignments toward the end of the term have more complicated skill sets and more of them. So we're building up students' capacity in a sequence that way. Takeaway point number 3, and there's only 6, so we're halfway there. This one is to specify the pertinent knowledge and skills up front with criteria and to help students self-monitor. I've given you a couple of examples of how different teachers have done that in different disciplines. So you see a chemistry lab report set of criteria on the left, and then on the right you see a similar set of criteria, but in this context it's for writing essays. But these are the kinds of checklists that I'm talking about that students could be equipped with up front so they can monitor their own progress while they're working. Then example 4, again, I've mentioned this before, but helping students to see examples of successful work with that criteria applied, annotated examples. And in page 4, heading 4 on your handout, you'll see 2 ways that different faculty have done that. On the top of the page is a biology paper. And you see that the teacher has annotated in the column where it is that the research summary is happening. This is what it looks like. And here's where it looks like when we talk about why this study has importance in the context of that research. On the bottom is a sample from my own art and architecture course, an Italian Renaissance course, where I'm showing students just how to construct the sort of glossary entry we want to build. We wanted for all students to build together a glossary of art and architecture terms. But there were 3 discrete steps to putting together a good glossary entry, and you'll see that they're numbered in order on this particular example. So what seemed like a really simple task, write a glossary entry for our course, actually was something that we could show students a good example of how that would work, so they didn't have to spin their wheels, trial and error, figuring it out. We showed them what that should look like. Then point 5 here, coming out of another whole body of research that's cited over here on the left of your chart, is this. We want to structure for students an opportunity for them to give each other feedback, not only because it gives them good feedback, because it also gives them a sense of confidence and a sense of belonging. It builds up these positive attribution kinds of characteristics for students. And I've given you an example of a couple of ways that we could do that. On the left of page 5, heading 5, you see Eric Mazur's physics example. He teaches a concept to his students, a large lecture course, and then he gives them a practice question. And if the students can pair up and answer that question accurately in a 2-minute window, he knows they understand that concept. And if they don't answer it accurately in that 2 minutes by working together, then he knows he has to reteach that concept until they get it. The second example you see is a set of criteria that's easily adjustable for your own purposes, but this is a sort of a checklist that students could use to give each other feedback on a draft of a paper. So again, I'm mixing up the different disciplines with physics and essay writing here, or that might even work for any kind of paper, actually. And then our final takeaway point is this. And you'll see the exact template that the faculty in our study used last year on page 6 of your handout, where we mapped it out for them. We want for you to discuss the purposes, tasks, and criteria of work with students before they begin working. So now I'm going to ask you to apply that. Research summary is done, and it's time for you to apply. Now, if you're anything like my students, you feel like, wait a minute, I'm not ready to take all that research and now do something with it. Much like students, we need an annotated example of what that looks like. So let's do that together. First, we'll go through a few sample assignments together before I ask for you to do this to your own assignments in pairs afterwards. So if you turn to page 7 of your handout, you'll see sample A. This is an intro-level social sciences course that focuses on communication skills. And I want you to take a look at this assignment and look only for the purpose. I'll give you a minute to read through it in a moment, but I want you to look for just the purpose. when you think you have nailed it, when you think you absolutely have identified what skills will the students practice and what knowledge will the students gain, just give me a little wave of the hand so I'll know how we're doing. Just the purpose, skills and knowledge. Go ahead. Who thinks they have absolutely identified what the skill is for this, or what the knowledge is for this assignment? What skills and knowledge will students gain from doing this assignment? Okay.
I would say the knowledge is to learn more about discipline that they're interested in.
Okay.
So gain knowledge from an expert.
Great. Okay, that's a good knowledge piece to gain from an assignment. That would be motivating to a student to learn something about a discipline or a career that interests you. What about the skills? What skills are involved here? Which ones look like the most important ones to you? Asking good interview questions. That's a big one. What else? To conduct an interview. Right. That's another important skill in this assignment. There are a lot of others. What else do you see?
Well, they're learning to communicate and then also to summarize what they've pulled through that interview.
Summarizing your results. Excellent. What else do you see there?
Also learn about themselves in terms of what they think their career goals were.
Terrific. Self-reflection. Right.
They might not like it after they've talked to somebody.
Right. So they're gathering the information, but then they need to evaluate and reflect and assess, right? And
in a summarizing form. So
and summarize.
an interview
Okay.
and information so that
Right.
it makes sense.
Right. And how about just figuring out who to interview? That's another whole skill set. That takes some expertise as well.
Actually, all of these verbs that identify the skills are
Transcribe is one of those verbs, right? So there are a lot of skills embedded in this assignment. But for an intro level communications course, you think you could pinpoint maybe what's the one or two most essential ones that this assignment is really looking for?
the person-to-person, for the person-to-person engaging.
Okay, engage
With an expert.
with an expert. Okay, engaging with an expert, having a real conversation with an expert. That's really got a whole lot of smaller skills built into it that we think the students have probably been practicing in some sort of a sequence. But take a look also now at the criteria for this. So we think we have the purpose. Take a look at the criteria. How do you know, how would the student know if they're doing this effectively? What markers, what criteria will they have to judge their own success while they're doing the work? Shout it out when you see one.
I think if I was a student, I would just look for the numbers, 8 to 10 questions, 1-minute interview, and then 400 words. And then I'd be like, I'm done.
Okay, that's a really good way to look at it, actually. That's probably how a lot of students would look at it, for the numbers. How many pages, how much time, right? How many words?
They want to quantify it. So
Right.
And that gets on my nerves because I always tell them it's not about the word count.
Right.
It's about the full process. Don't just get to 500 and then go, and that's all.
Yeah.
Do that too. And I tell them, like, finish your thought.
So when we look at this assignment from this perspective, and you'll see that I've coded this at the top of your handout as one of the less transparent examples. When we look at this, it took us a while to look at all the individual different skills and to figure out maybe which one's the most important one. The knowledge piece, we feel more confident about the knowledge maybe than about which skill set is the most important here. But for us, we are the best possible audience to be equipped to answer this question about the purpose of an assignment, because we are people who have done assignments like this and done them well. And then we've done so many of them well that we graduated. And then we probably did another degree after that. And then we went back to teach other people how to do these kinds of assignments. So if we have any doubt, if it's hard at all for us to locate the exact criteria or the exact purpose in terms of skills and knowledge, what chance do you think a first-generation student from an underperforming high school system would have of identifying the purpose of this assignment? Yeah, not so great. Pretty slim chance. So this is what I'm talking about when I say that some assignments are not fair to the new majority incoming population of college students that we have in this country. So a student who's well prepared, who understands what college work looks like, maybe someone in their family went to college, can help them parse this and figure out what's really needed, that student has a much higher chance of success than the student who doesn't have that information. The information is there, maybe, but it's embedded really deeply. It's not transparent. Let's take a look at sample B, because I'd like to move across the disciplines. Sample B is a math example, and I want you similarly to look for the purpose of this assignment, the skills and the knowledge. Do we have any mathematicians in here? So this is going to be even harder for us than...
Yeah, I'm already lost. You lost me already. I blazed forgotten all things.
So take a look at the very last step of the assignment, because that's got a skill embedded in it. What is that skill?
To use derivatives to create a graph from an equation.
So you're going to take an equation, which is some sort of quantitative information, and create a graph, which is a visual depiction of quantitative information. So that sounds like a skill that a student could relate to even if they're not a mathematician. Take information and make it visual, right? But you have to work hard to find that there. Similarly, this is not a very transparent assignment. Think about the task. If I think that these assignments have anything in common, I think it's the task. Both of these assignments are kind of 100% task with no framing much about the purpose and the criteria. Or you have to dig deep and interpret a lot to find the purpose and the criteria. Now let's take a look at some samples assignments that make that a little more transparent to students. Take a look at sample C on page 8. Tell me if that looks familiar to you. That may ring some bells.
I'll be signing autographs.
This is sample A, revised with a purpose statement and criteria. Although you don't see there's a separate page of criteria that's in the form of a rubric. And we have the author of this actual assignment in our room, Catherine Johnson, who has published about the impact that this assignment had on improving the quality of students' work.
I was kind of thinking when you were talking earlier about, like, students also at a first year are in that sort of, I think it's called dualistic thinking, where they sort of like, you know, just developmentally, they believe that there's a right answer and that you are telling them about the right answer. And so I think they just aren't able yet to, I mean, even though some people are like, oh, we're telling them how to do it, but you kind of are telling them how to do it because they are still at that developmental stage.
Yeah.
Well, they've also been rewarded. I mean, so I have so many students that they've been rewarded because they've been taught to the test, and the test has one answer. And so they basically, give me the answer, and I will work backwards as to what it is you want from me.
Yeah.
And when the answer is open-ended, it's not a problem.
Right.
Answer that problem.
And the purpose is sometimes to get a single right answer, but a lot of the purpose is to learn something through the process of reaching that answer, right? And if we can make that a little clearer to students, I think we'll see more creative work and also more cooperation. I know that Catherine and many of the other instructors in our study noticed less resistance from students when they understood more about how this benefits me.
I can't even tell you, we get no calls anymore or emails. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing.
Right.
Are there upper class students also in this study, or did you mostly focus on first year students? 'Cause I'd
The
be curious
results
to
that
see if
I'm
there's a
telling you
difference.
about apply mostly, 2/3 of the courses were intro level and about 1/3 of them were intermediate level. But we're conducting this study all the way up through graduate level courses as well. So if you look at sample D, you've got a science version of a more transparent assignment. And for this one, you can see that there's a clear purpose, task, and criteria. So I'm not going to ask you to find them. Instead, I'm going to ask you, how could you make the purpose statement better? How could you make the purpose statement feel more important for the student? Look at the skills that are identified here. They're very specific to the single assignment. Can you think of a way to make those skills sound more valuable in the context of a student's life?
It's kind of like information literacy, like can you find and evaluate good information?
Can you, in this assignment, find make a career major that you think meets your talents best? So what are your interests that will match up with?
Yeah, we're talking now about the science example. But yes, your answer does apply very well to that example. So in this science example, the skills and the knowledge that are specified in the purpose statement are specific to the task of making a science poster. But we've just seen how you can take that skill set of evaluating the reliability of information. That's a skill that students could use outside the context of designing a science poster. So many of the instructors in our study thought hard about, I can make the skills apply just to this one assignment, or just to this course, or to the major, or to students' lifelong learning skills. And you'll have to judge in the context of your course what's most important for the students to gain from this. But to the extent you can make the skills feel relevant to the students' lives beyond the context of this assignment, that tends to make students feel more motivated and to see the value of the exercise. And they're more willing then to do the task. How about the criteria statement for this? Do you think that you could come up with a better way of describing the criteria for this assignment? Maybe I should ask you first, do you see any drawbacks to this statement of criteria?
I'm not sure what as complete as possible.
So it's asking for the work to be as complete as possible. That's a little vague.
Can you give an example? Can you create an example showing these skills?
Right. There's not a lot of specificity. We don't know that there's an example. Maybe an example was discussed in class. In fact, this very instructor, Allison Sloat, is going to run a research experiment for us the next time she teaches this course, giving students multiple examples where they do the annotation of the example by using an established checklist that they all agree on. And she's going to see what difference that makes to the quality of the students' work on the assignments compared to this year's course. But yes, what I'd like to point out about the criteria statement and the purpose statement for this assignment is that you've already seen ways that you could make them better. And the faculty in our study also said to us afterwards, we did these 2 assignments, we revised them, and we did a pretty good job of revising them. We could have done better. And you can see how you could have done better with this assignment. But the good news is that what you see in front of you was good enough to get the dramatic benefits for students' learning that we observed last year. So think about the power we have to give all students in college an equitable chance to succeed. If we can do something twice pretty well and have an impact, think of the impact we could have all across the country if we did it more than twice, or if we did it better than pretty well. But just to do it twice is enough to get the kind of impact that we had. So now I'd like for you to do this for each other. The kind of analysis that we're doing of these assignments, we're going to now do for each other. And I always feel like when we move from the point of working as a whole group to having students do individual work, I've got to justify that. So here's my purpose, task, and criteria used in this case as a justification for what I'm about to ask you to do. Our purpose for this exercise I'm about to inflict upon you is this. The knowledge piece is that you will share some feedback and insights with a colleague about your assignment that you'll be using again in one of your courses. The skills, you're going to take transparency and the research findings and you're going to apply that to an assignment in your course. And you'll also be using this skill of engaging in a community of practice. Our task will have 4 steps. I will walk you through each step and give you specific instructions and an amount of time. And the criteria, by the time we're done, you will leave with a draft that you can use in your course, a draft of an assignment, and you'll leave with some insights from your colleagues who are playing the role of novices. And you may even leave with some insights from actual student novices, but we'll get to that in a moment. So here's what you're going to do in your head. First of all, you're going to need to find, for this to work really well, you need to find yourself a disciplinary stranger or a student. Now, so this is where the students come in. I'm going to walk you through a series of steps where we're going to focus on the purpose of your assignment, the task, and the criteria for it. And you can gather feedback either from a disciplinary stranger, like a fellow faculty member, who's outside of your discipline and therefore looking at your assignment from the perspective of a novice, or you could seek the help of a student who is really expert at playing the role of the novice student. Now, the students that we have here are not exactly novices because they are peer tutors who are trained to help students parse assignments in exactly this way. But because they've had experience with their fellow students, they'll be able to reflect back to you the experience of how a novice student might look at your assignments. Would you guys just care to introduce your names and your majors?
My name's Juliana, Judy for short, and at the moment I'm dual majoring in psychology and criminal justice.
Okay, I'm Sophia, and I'm majoring in cellular molecular biology with a minor in actuarial sciences.
We're very lucky to have their help. So I'm going to ask you to stand up, and you can find yourself a partner who is either one of our expert novices, which seems like a contradiction, or you can find yourself a disciplinary stranger. But for the next 20, 25 minutes, to be really productive for you, you're going to want to find someone who is as unfamiliar with your discipline and your assignment as you can get. So what we've done now is here was what we set out to do in terms of the purpose, the task, and criteria. We started just wanting for you to understand the research findings and then to share some feedback and, oh, sorry, wrong slide, here we go. To understand the research findings that we had with our project last year and then to apply what we learned to some assignments that you could use in your class. We did that by reviewing the research findings and then by you actually applying them. And I think you're leaving with an overview of the findings, some strategies you could use, and even some draft ideas you could use to revise an assignment. If you would like for us now to measure the difference that makes for your students, if you want to get one of those individual reports about your students' learning in your course, the kind of report that helps other faculty decide what one thing they'd want to change, I'm happy to provide that for you. All you need to do is sign up on the hyperlink that's listed at the bottom of pretty much every page of this handout, or email me, which is also, I think, on every page of the handout, so that you could continue on to do this. And if you want to get further feedback on that assignment, I'll send a follow-up email to this, but we will have a session the second Tuesday of every month at 2 p.m. We're calling them Transparent Tuesdays at 2. And we'll have an online session where you can put your assignment up there and get feedback from whoever is there for our Transparent Tuesdays at 2 session. Second Tuesday of every month. Okay? Thank you very much for your hard work. I am on a Friday afternoon. I really appreciate your cooperation with this. I want to give a special thank you to our expert, novice, expert students. Thank you so much for helping us out. And I'm happy to stay around for a few minutes just to respond to any questions, but I'll follow up with an email. If there's anyone here who's here that didn't register, then I don't have your email, so please jot it down for me so you can get the links here. Thank you.